Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is Ron's Amazing Stories. We have stories that should thrill you a little and chill you a little.
It's amazing.
What you'll hear are adventures sent in by you guys, classic stories from the pulp mags, and episodes from the golden age of radio. We have special segments like Ghost Stories with Sylvia.
That's amazing.
And Paranormal Expeditions.
I think we're going to have a lot of fun.
So settle in for the next hour and enjoy the show. One more thing. You just might want to prepare yourself to be taken away from today.
Another 5-minute mystery.
This 5-minute mystery is being brought to you by These Are Your Stories. They began on the podcast in 2019 and have become the most popular part of the show ever since. After all, what is a podcast without a good story?
That would be boring.
This has been your noonday program of news. The weather for this afternoon is cloudy and overcast, with probably showers this evening.
Why do you bother with that radio, Wrighton? There's never anything new.
What else is there to do around a firehouse eatings?
Sleep and go to fires.
We'll be going to enough fires, all right, if they don't catch that arsonist who's been trying to burn up the whole city.
Yeah, I'd like to get my hands on that devil.
Maybe we will, Edens. Maybe we will.
Holy smoke, here we go again.
Watch that baby burn.
Looks like the end of the world, doesn't it?
If they don't get their bloodhounds after that firebug, it soon will be.
Hey, who's that guy the chief's dragging along here?
I don't know, but he's really got a grip on his arm.
Maybe it's the firebug.
Hey, Chief, who's the man you're holding?
The rat who's been setting all these fires.
Where are you taking him?
Down to the station. Put out this blaze and hurry along.
You hear that, Wrighton? Pour on the water. I want to see a firebug get singed.
You still deny that you set that fire?
Let me call my lawyer. You can't question me this way. It's illegal.
Let me go to work on him, Chief.
That won't be necessary, Edens. I'm sure this prolific arsonist will come clean in just a few minutes.
You got no proof?
You were seen running out of the burning building just as the engines pulled up. How did the fire start?
Listen, pal, I tell you I don't know. Now will you let me go?
Why did you wait till the fire had gained so much headway before you finally ran out?
I just woke up and I heard your sirens drawing near the building.
Listen, my friend. We're out to break this cycle of arson that's been slowly destroying the city. You're in for some pretty rough weather ahead unless you come clean and tell me how that fire started. The sooner you give me the truth, the easier it'll go with you.
All right, Chief, I'll play ball with you. The whole fire was an accident.
What?
Yeah, I swear it was. I really went in there to get some sleep. And when I woke up, I lit a cigarette. And that was my big mistake. The building was so old it was almost falling apart, and there were cobwebs hanging all over the place. While I was shaking out the flame of the match, it hit some of the cobwebs hanging from the low beams, and that was it. Webs caught fire and spread to the roof, and the dry wood began to burn in a flash.
What do we do now, Chief?
Take him to the police and book him on a charge of arson. His story shows that he deliberately set that fire.
What lie in the firebug story did the chief detect? In just a moment, we'll know, but first...
Well, that is a first.
What do you mean?
A complete story with everything you need to solve it. Quite well done, I might add.
Well, I agree with the well done part. I could actually feel the fire. And the acting, well, it was an Emmy award-winning quality performance. If you ask me.
Wrong. That was a bit over the top. And quite frankly, you embarrass yourself.
Hey, if I don't do it, who will?
True enough.
And now, back to our story.
What are you talking about, Chief? I told you it was an accident.
If it was, you would have told a different story. You see, there was one very important flaw in your story that condemned it as a lie.
Prove it.
You said that the cobwebs caught fire and spread to the roof. Well, I'm afraid that isn't quite accurate. Unfortunately for you, cobwebs don't flame. All right, boys, take him away. Our firebug needs cooling off.
Cobwebs don't flame. what a classic end to a truly epic story.
I didn't see it coming.
Who could? After all, things like this are once in a lifetime.
Do you think the 5-minute mystery will ever be the same?
How could it? We have just heard gold.
What's that you say?
Hello, and welcome to the podcast. This one is all about you.
Well, it's about time.
No, not just you, sir. I mean, it's about all of you.
How can that be?
Well, it just is. You see, this podcast is jam-packed with your stories. As in, these are your stories?
So, what you are saying is that it is not about me.
And that would be correct. What we have today is the story of These Are Your Stories.
That doesn't make sense.
It will. It really will. Did you know that Ron's Amazing Stories is sponsored by Audible? Audible is home to over 180,000 audiobooks, any of which can be yours. All you have to do is sign up for a 30-day free trial, and Audible will give you a free book and access to their original content. To download your free audiobook, go to audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. Thank you, Audible. And now, it's time for your stories.
These are your stories, sent by you, for you.
Welcome to a very special edition of These Are Your Stories. I've been wanting to do this for a long time, a kind of history of how all this got started. And the best way to do that is to play the very first These Are Your Stories, which happened on May 3rd, 2018. And it sounded like this. I have mostly included your stories into the What's That You Say segment. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. I've always thought that the segment should be used for answering emails rather than reading stories. So, I want to introduce These Are Your Stories, a new segment just for your stories. Now, we have 2 submissions this week. The first one comes from Daniel Conti of Raleigh, North Carolina. Daniel sent in his story via Facebook in his own voice. Unfortunately, I was not able to use that recording, so I transcribed it and sent it back to Daniel for his approval. Well, he gave his thumbs up, and here is his story. It was the early 1980s when my story occurred. I was a 10-year-old kid living in outer Washington, D.C. One night, my dog Joey and I snuck downstairs into the basement to watch kung fu movies on late-night TV. Joey and I were well into a show when I felt something odd that compelled me to look upstairs. What I saw, I will never forget, and you will not believe. There was a short, glowing creature looking down at us. He had some sort of apparatus attached to himself and looked very strange. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and I even asked Joey, "Are you seeing this too?" His response was quick. Joey is a boxer with lightning-quick reflexes. He tore after the thing and chased it around the house. I had no choice but to follow after my dog all the way to the front door. It all ended there, and we were left alone. Joey and I went back down to the couch where we sat down totally confused. Neither of us were able to sleep that night. For those of you who are not sure about my story, I say this. I know this happened because my dog saw it too. Daniel. Daniel, that is a truly out there story. As I listened to you tell it on your recording, I could hear in your voice the sincerity of it all. I believe you saw something, and I'm quite sure I want nothing to do with what you saw. Thank you, Daniel, for sending in your story. Our second story comes from our old friend, Tom Williams, in Berlin. He sent us this humorous graveyard tale that should not scare anyone, but should remind us to never judge a book by its accent. Tom recorded the story for us, so here is, in his own words, a story he simply called My Graveyard Story.
I went out to my mother-in-law's to clean up our gravesite after the winter. Forgetting the watering can, I looked about to see if there was one loosely lying about. There was no one except a little old lady over at another gravesite, so I decided to walk over and see if she had one, which she didn't. And I asked her, in my best German, "Do you know where I can get a watering can?" She, of course, had learned a little bit of English in school, as many Germans have, decided to respond politely in English. And she pointed in the general direction of the entrance to the cemetery and said, "Go to hell," and smiled and went about her business. I thought, my, this really is a rude person. Did it on a friendly basis, but rather rude. So as I left the graveyard, on the left, just before the main entrance, I saw another tombstone. And behind the tombstone was a watering can. But on the tombstone itself, it said, Mr. Hell. Never make quick judgments of people.
Two more great stories for you guys from you guys. I want to thank both Daniel and Tom for sending them in. That was some good stuff. Well, that story submission I talked about has been up and running ever since, and it has been used by you countless times. Thank you for that. Our next batch of stories comes from the very next week, which was episode number 327. I picked this one because, well, it's really good.
These are your stories, sent by you, for you.
We have had 2 stories submitted to our brand new RAS story submission page. In fact, it is the very first time anyone has used it. The first comes from my brother Jim in Rio Rancho, New Mexico. Those of you who remember know that this is Jim's 3rd contribution. The last one was his incredible tale of while he was in Ireland. You can listen to that on episode number 307, Roslyn Chapel. His new story is just as amazing and falls under the category of head scratcher. I read it to you now in his own words. It felt like cheating, but it sounded like fun. I was going to drive from Albuquerque to Denver to attend a church convention. The trip was supposed to take 6 hours straight up Interstate 25. Anyway, that's how it was expected to go. My problem was that church conventions are, as you might imagine, deathly boring. There's usually no sensible reason for even scheduling these events, which means they always descend into arguments about trivia or bombastic political proclamations. A friend of mine who pastors a large church proclaims the pointlessness of these gatherings by bringing his entire staff, who spend every day of the convention working on the business of their home church, right there in front of all of the other delegates. My protest would be different, but to me it seemed a lot better. Instead of rushing to Denver on the freeway, I would turn duty into vacation by taking the back way. My route would take me north to Santa Fe, where I would leave the freeway to follow the Rio Grande up onto a sheer plateau, where I would pass through the ancient village of Taos. Then I would skirt the narrow slit between the Rio Grande Canyon and the towering peaks of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. My route would take me through the high altitudes of the San Luis Valley of southern Colorado, from which the winding roads would lift me even higher into the Rockies. Eventually, I would pass Leadville, the highest incorporated town in the U.S. with an elevation over 9,000 feet. Finally, I would drop down to the Colorado River, where I would meet Interstate 70 eastbound for Denver. Needless to say, I was going to be late for the convention, if I got there at all. After all, there were going to be some tempting stopping points on the route for sure. It was well planned and was proceeding perfectly until it led to an event that I can't explain or even fathom to this day. The event I mentioned haunts me with the clarity of a Blu-ray movie, even 25 years later. I was driving 12 miles north of Alamosa, Colorado, with the green fields of the San Luis Valley shimmering in May sunshine on both sides of the two-lane highway that pushed towards the distant mountains. In the valley, the road is straight and traffic is scattered. I came upon a car moving very slowly. It was a convertible sedan of at least 10 years old. The top was down and I saw 2 people in the front seats. I noticed that they were dressed in odd color and wore twisted hats into curling shapes that didn't bring to mind any of the cultures that were the soul of this region. On the rural roads of the vast Southwest, if you're going any speed under 70, you're impeding traffic. These people were going about 35. I came up fast and started what I thought was going to be an easy pass, when suddenly the driver of the convertible looked directly at me, smiled, and gunned his engine. I could see an 18-wheeler up the road that had seemed far away when I began my pass, but now was closing fast. I slowed down, intending to get back behind the other car, but the driver slowed exactly at my pace, smiling at me all the time. The big truck was bearing down on me, and I was trapped. He was mere yards away, and there was no time for me to even feel terror. And that's it. That's all I have. The next thing I remember was driving along the right lane with the fields of St. Louis on both sides of a now empty road. No car, no truck, no traffic anywhere in sight. But unlike the first part of this story, at this point, the clarity of memory is gone, replaced by a light mental fog that slowly lifts as my memory of the rest of the trip unfolds. What happened? The event itself stirs in my mind almost daily, but even after a quarter century, I have no explanation, no theory, not even a speculation. I've heard many stories of people who miraculously avoided car accidents, but this was different. In my mind, there's no way I'm not dead. The truck was too close, and the small car I was driving would have been crumpled like an aluminum can in a crash like that. All I can say for sure is this. Under God's sovereignty, that day in the San Luis Valley was not my appointed time. Incidentally, I did make the convention and found it every bit as vacuous as I expected and didn't hang around there too much. Do you know that Denver has some of the most amazing shopping places and some truly great food? Well, Jim, what a great story, and I have to say, right here and now, I had no idea my own brother had been through so many strange events. This one boggles the mind. For those of you wondering about my brother's health, he has made a full recovery from his amputation, and just over a year later is walking again on his own. God has blessed our family, and I thank him for it every day. Thank you, Jim, for your story. Our second story comes from Melissa in Carmel Valley, California. She writes, love the podcast. Here's a story that happened to me while attending California Polytechnic State University, Cal-Poly for short. It was the summer of 1997, and I was living with roommates in a house that had some invisible residents. We had been dealing with the typical poltergeist action in which, after about the fourth time, became annoying. Nobody would get hurt, but books would fall off the shelves by themselves, and one day, after hearing a pretty loud crash in the kitchen, we discovered broken plates littering the floor. It always happened when no one was looking, which was even more irritating. After a particularly lively day, I was getting ready to head out to the campus for my weekly radio show at the student-run station. Before leaving, I decided to verbally confront the entity out loud. In my room, I asked it to make itself known in front of us. As if on cue, a 45 record which was sitting on top of my stereo across the room came sailing out to me just like a frisbee being tossed. It hit my shins and fell to the floor. Now, I wasn't scared. I was satisfied that it had finally gained enough courage to show something in person. I thanked the ghost and continued on my way to the radio station. The odd thing was that we never heard from it again. I still can't believe it happened, but it did. I remember telling my dad about it shortly afterwards, and he said, "Have you ever heard of telekinesis?" I took this to mean that he believed I saw what I did, but couldn't wrap his brain around it and was looking for a more scientific approach. Anyway, thanks, Ron. Melissa. Well, Melissa, I can't wrap my brain around it either. Maybe the entity was just looking for someone to acknowledge it. You, having done that, made it stay, and he, she, it moved on. Poltergeists, on the other hand, are known to be active and then stop abruptly. It may last for several hours or months. Most of the time, the activity takes place at night and includes moving objects, tapping sounds, loud noises, whispers, odd smells, and even shrieks. Your story fits perfectly with a poltergeist. Thank you for telling us your story. It's a good one, for sure. That's it for the stories this week. Please do tell us your story and try out the new RAS story submission form. Thanks again to Jim and Melissa. Okay, we fast forward a few months to July 25th, 2019, and another batch of stories. These come from episode number 390, titled More Black-Eyed Kids, and was the most listened to episode of 2019. How about that?
These are your stories, sent by you, for you.
This story comes from down south. Dovey Bell from Lawrenceville, Georgia, sent this one in. Hello from Lawrenceville. We have a fun yearly tradition here called the City of Lawrenceville Summer Concert Series. These are free concerts held in the downtown area on the Lawrenceville lawn. Now, one would think that you are safe from the paranormal here. After all, some of these concerts can get pretty loud. One year I had an experience I will never forget, and I will share it with you and your listeners. My husband and I are huge Zak Brown fans. We can't afford to attend their concert, so the next best thing is a very good tribute band called 20 Ride. They were part of the concert series, and they are fantastic. My grandfather was also a fan of the Zak Brown Band. We had planned to attend this concert together, but he passed away unexpectedly from hip surgery complications. We were all devastated by his death. He was only 69 years old and was in very good health. At the memorial service, I felt like he was there with me. We talked about his love for music and specifically the Zak Brown Band. I mentioned that if there was a chance of him coming back, it would be for the upcoming 20 Ride concert. The day arrived, and we were getting ready to go. I walked over to the picture I had on the mantel of my grandfather, picked it up, and whispered, "This one's for you, Papa." I felt a chill go through my body and knew that he had heard me. We left early to get as close as possible to the main stage. There was no way to get right to it because of the VIP section, but we were on the first row after that, close enough to see, but not reach out and touch. We were about 3 songs in when I felt something touch my right hand. Thinking it was my husband, I tried to grasp it back, but I felt nothing. I looked at my husband, and his arms were raised up, clapping to the music. I thought, how strange. But there were a lot of people around me. During the show, the band played a montage of pictures from previous concerts. Lo and behold, one of the photos was that of my grandfather at another concert we had attended some time back. He had a broad smile on his face, and it felt like to me that he was looking right at me. 20 Ride was performing one of my favorite songs called My Old Man. This song hit me like a ton of bricks and made me remember just how special my papa was. I felt something touch me again, and this time when I looked down, I saw a disembodied hand. It had a ring on its finger, and I knew that ring well. My grandfather was never without his wedding band. It was a very unique fire-treated titanium band with X's and O's carved into it. I'd never seen anything like it before. I smiled and whispered again, "This one's for you, Papa." Dovey Bell, Lawrenceville, Georgia. Dovey, I loved this story. It actually sent a chill down my spine and a tear to my eye. Thank you for sharing it. While not a die-hard fan of Zak Brown, I surely do love his music. Next to Chicken Fried, My Old Man is one of my favorites. The video for it is nothing short of amazing. I thought I would take a minute to read some lyrics from that song. Copyrights forbid me from playing it, but the second verse really brings home the meaning to your story. Please enjoy it. My old man. Feel the callus on his hands and dusty overalls. My old man. Now I finally understand I have a lot to learn from my old man. Thank you, Dovey. This next story comes from Mason from Laguna Beach, California. Mason calls it Charged Shadow. We were living in a house on Laguna Beach that had been there since the 1920s. In its history, it had been a speakeasy, a brothel, and a house for smuggling illegal immigrants. One day, my new wife and I were having an argument. I can't even recall what it was about. She walked down the block to get a cup of coffee and cool off. I was left alone in the house. The way the place was built was incredibly haphazard. There was a bedroom and a living room on one side, then a bathroom with 2 entrances. On the other side of the bathroom was a hallway that had windows on one side and 2 bedrooms on the other. So, from our bedroom, I could look across the hall into the bathroom, then through the bathroom down the second hallway. I was standing at my dresser and noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned, and there was, honest to God, a black figure. This gives me goosebumps just typing it 17 years later. It was maybe 3 feet tall, and it was only vaguely humanoid. It reminded me of black scribbles, like someone had scribbled a human shape, but the scribbles moved. It looked like electricity arcing. That's the best way to describe it. There was no sound that I could remember, and when I saw it, I really wasn't afraid. Then it noticed me looking at it. I can't say that it turned around, it just focused on me, I guess. Then I was scared. I didn't move, didn't scream, nothing. I was just frozen. Then the thing came at me, rushing down the hall towards me. I have no idea what it intended, but as soon as it entered the bathroom, the door closest to me just slammed shut. I screamed and yelled for my wife, but I knew she wasn't home. I went outside and waited until she got home about 10 minutes later. Now, I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe I saw anything supernatural, but I know I saw something. I just don't know what it was. Mason, Laguna Beach, California. Well, Mason, I've heard stories like this before, and most people don't know what they saw. Experts would put this in the ghost category, but personally, this sounds much more malevolent. Thank you for sharing it with us. This next batch of stories received so many responses that I counted this one as a These Are Your Stories classic. One of my very favorites, if you want to know the truth. It came from episode number 413, which aired in December of 2019. Get ready for some chills.
These are your stories, sent by you, for you.
Our first story comes from the great city of Los Angeles, California, and was sent in by Belinda Sparks. Hello, Ron. I know how much you love a good head scratcher, and I have one for you. My boyfriend Mateo and I had a real experience one night while we were staying at the Hollywood Roosevelt. It's one of the more famous places in the city, and it had always been a dream of mine to stay there. My guy gave me one night for my birthday. We stayed in one of their cabana suites close to the famous Marilyn Monroe suite. We had a wonderful evening and could not believe just how luxurious everything was. I knew that it had to be expensive, but I didn't care. It was something that I will never forget. Eventually, we got tired and decided to call it a night. I was sleeping in the amazing bed, and my boyfriend was on the couch. I was awoken by the sound of a trumpet. It was very strange, so I called out to Mateo and asked if he'd heard it. But he was dead to the world. I got up and walked around the room. Nothing. The Bose stereo was turned off, and the huge TV was silent. I shook Mateo awake and told him what had happened. He said it was probably just a guest and not to worry about it. I went back to bed and was just about asleep when I heard it again. This time Mateo was awake and he heard it too. We searched around the room, outside hall, and the cabana balcony and could not find the source. We were about to give up when it played one last time. This time, it had a sad jazz sound to it. I called down to the main desk to ask about it. They said it probably just came up from the jazz club down the street. We doubted that because we were pretty high up from street level. Some might have been scared by what we heard, but to me, that just made the whole experience that much more enjoyable. Belinda Sparks, Los Angeles, California. What a great story, but would you like to hear the rest of the story? I did some research on the Hollywood Roosevelt. Not only was it the home to Marilyn Monroe, where legend has it her ghost still haunts her old stomping grounds, there's a famous mirror in the lobby where people take pictures and claim that they can see Marilyn's reflection. But that's not all. On the 9th floor, you can hear late actor Montgomery Clift, who lived in Suite 928 for 3 months while filming From Here to Eternity, practicing on his trumpet. Guests have asked the hotel staff to tell the person in the next room to stop playing in the middle of the night. However, the room was actually vacant at the time. Creepy? Yeah, I would say that is. Thank you for your story, Belinda. This story was sent in to the show several months back. It was sent without any contact information other than a reference to Texas. I have no idea where it came from. I ran it through my plagiarism checker and found that it had been posted no less than 7 times on the internet with a 72% accuracy rate. One time with a different dog name, another time from a person named Adrian, and yet another during Christmas. My guess is that this story is a complete work of fiction, or perhaps folklore. Hey, maybe it's even true. The story was written poorly, so I revised it, and I read it to you now. I do not offer any proof that it is real, but it is a pretty good story, and it goes like this. Let me preface this by saying I'm no means a writer, just a domestic engineer living in North Texas. Also, I don't believe in the paranormal, ghosts, demons, aliens, whatever. However, I did have an event that happened to me on Halloween that I have to admit has me scratching my head. It had been a slow trick-or-treat night in our neighborhood that evening, which is pretty odd in itself. We usually have kids from different areas drop off in ours and have a constant parade at our door. On this night, I'd say we'd had no more than 8 to 10 groups come by the entire evening. It was about 9:30 p.m., and my husband and I were sitting in our family room watching one of those ghost shows based on supposedly actual events. Like I said, I don't believe in that stuff, but I do like a good ghost story now and again, and it was Halloween after all. We hadn't had any activity at our door for over half an hour, and it was getting pretty late, so we decided to turn the porch light off and let our dog Chloe out of her crate. Chloe is an American bulldog and is very docile. We only put her in her crate because we were afraid she'd try to get out to play with all the kids, and I didn't want to have to chase her down the street. Also, we didn't want her to scare any of the little kids because she can look pretty intimidating if she wanted to. I turned the outside light off, let Chloe out, and she followed me back to the couch. Then she stopped for a minute, sniffed the air, deciding that all was well. She laid down at my feet. It was getting close to 10 p.m. when my husband decided he'd had enough fun for the night and was going to go upstairs, take a shower, and get ready for bed. After all, it was a Thursday, and he still had to get up early the next day. Our teenage son was out with his friends at a local haunted house and wasn't expected back for another hour or so. So that left me alone on the couch with Chloe. Now, just because I don't believe doesn't mean these shows don't freak me out just a bit. And being alone now watching, I'd have to say I was kind of on edge, as it were. It wasn't long after I heard the upstairs water for the shower turn on, and there came a light knock at the front door. My initial reaction was, "What the heck? Really? It's almost 10 p.m. Go home." But then an uneasy feeling came over me. Why the knock? Our doorbell glows in the dark, and without the porch light, it would be extra obvious to anyone there. I paused, but I really couldn't just ignore it. Our front door has a big beveled glass panel, and anyone right at the door would see someone was in the family room watching TV. It would be pretty rude of me to just sit there and not answer it. Again from the front door, I glanced down at Chloe, and she was gone. My gaze followed her normal path that she would take to the door, expecting her to be on her way as she normally does. She wasn't there. I stood up to look around the room and found her crouching at the kitchen entrance like she was wanting out. However, she never asks to go out like that. She always comes, licks my hand, or puts her head on my knee. This was totally out of character for her, and I have to say it heightened my anxiety. "Chloe," I said, "crate." She turned to look at me like, "Heck no, lady, I ain't moving." I yelled up to my husband, but he was already in the shower, so I knew that there was no chance of him hearing me. About that time, a car drove down our street and cast enough light on the door to where I could see the silhouettes of two small children through the glass. I instantly felt relieved. It was just some kids, probably a couple of my neighbors on their way back home that wanted to stop by to show me their costume or something. I headed to the door and looked back to make sure Chloe wasn't going to follow. I need not have worried. What a great watchdog, I thought to myself, as she just sat there. I turned on the porch light and got to the door, and sure enough, I could see through the glass that it was just a couple of pretty small kids. A little late for such young ones, I thought, and began to wonder about what kind of parents would let their kids run the streets that late at night. I only opened the door enough to where I could block Chloe's escape if she decided to charge. What struck me immediately was how odd was it that the kids weren't wearing any costumes. They were in normal street clothes. No customary trick-or-treat either. I began to feel very uneasy again. It was a girl and a boy. The girl to my left was older, I'd say 11 or 12. I could see that she was blonde, but I couldn't make out any distinct features. Our lights are from high above and on columns at the front of the porch, so most of the light was coming from behind them. I had not opened the door wide enough for any of the light from inside to hit them directly. The boy was younger and about a foot shorter. I'd say he was 8 or 9 and looked like he had light brown hair. The girl very politely spoke up.
"Ma'am, can we please come inside and use your phone to call our mom?"
As she spoke, I had a feeling in the pit of my stomach that was telling me something was wrong. What kid, even at that age, doesn't have a cell phone on them these days? I couldn't remember the last time anyone had asked to use my home phone. Hun, don't you have a phone of your own that you can call your mom on?" I asked. This is when things got real weird. Both kids turned to look at each other like they were going to say something to one another, but neither of them spoke. They both looked back at me, and the girl said,
"Ma'am, my cell phone battery doesn't have any charge left in it. Can we please come inside and call our mother? We're alone, and my brother is so scared."
I have to admit there were two competing feelings inside of me. The first was that of a mother's heart, and I wanted to help these two children get to their mom. The other, a sinking fear in my gut that was keeping my feelings at bay. It was then that I noticed, during the short conversation, that I had already opened the door a few extra inches, of which I was completely unaware of doing. I stopped. "Honey, why don't you give me your mother's number and I can call her myself?" Another pause, and they looked at each other again. After a short moment, they turned back to me, and the girl said,
"Ma'am, my little brother has to use your bathroom. Can we please come in while you call our mom?"
And with that last statement, the little girl moved closer to the door like she was just going to walk on right by me. As she did, she stepped into the light coming from inside of the house, and I got my first real good look at her. Solid, jet black eyes. And that's all I could see. The motherly instinct was gone and replaced by terror that I don't think I've ever felt in my life. I could feel every hair on my arms and the back of my neck standing at attention. I closed the door to where just my face was able to stick out. The little girl stopped and again pleaded,
"Please, ma'am, we're really scared alone out here, and we have to come inside. Please help us."
Then, like on cue, both kids began to cry and whimper. It was then that the fear took over me, and I shut and locked the door. "I'll call your mom if you give me the number," I shouted through the door. "But I'm not letting you into my house." I could see them stand there on the porch, just looking through the beveled glass at me. Part of me wanted to run upstairs to my husband, but the bigger part didn't want to lose track of where they were. That would have freaked me out even more to not know where they were. After what seemed like forever, but was probably just a few seconds, I decided to call my neighbor that lives across the street. I made my way to the couch to grab my phone, and I glanced back at the door, and I saw a shadow figure standing there. It looked like dark smoke, and then quickly faded. When I got to my phone, I started to look for my neighbor's contact information. I glanced up again and watched as the kids stepped away from the porch and walked towards the street. I went to the door to get a better look at where they went. I could see that the kids were still standing there under the street lamp near my house, and they were staring at me. I dialed my neighbor and lifted the phone to my ear. Only then did the kids start walking down our street. I met my neighbor under the lamp, but the kids were nowhere to be found. I went back inside and I couldn't find Chloe anywhere. My husband came downstairs and could tell something was wrong. I quickly told him what had happened. We searched around together and finally found the dog under our bed, whimpering. Like I said, I don't believe in any of this stuff, and I've never heard of black-eyed kids before this. What I really think, what I have to think, is that these kids were just out yanking people's chains on Halloween night. But I will say this for them. They were good. Really good. They scared the crap out of me and my dog. Posted to the website anonymously. Well, that story, and as crazy as it sounds, feels pretty real to me. What did you think? I debated whether to share this one for a long time. Since it has been posted so many times across the internet, I'm not worried about copyright issues. The most recent post was in December of 2018, and it had a decidedly Christmas feel to it. I chose to go with the Halloween version. Is any of this story true? You know, I have always said that there's always a little truth in every story. If you are the author of this story and want to tell us what really happened, feel free to write me at ronsamazingstories@gmail.com. We want to know you and hear the rest of the story. Our last story comes from Jessica Edwards, who writes to us from New York. Hello, Ron. Thank you for your podcast. I love it. I heard you ask for stories, any stories, so here is mine. It isn't scary, a head-scratcher, or even very long, but it is true. I call it Drama in the Drama Class. One time my drama class teacher had gone home sick, so we were put into a classroom with a movie to entertain us for the period. During the movie, an alarm went off. None of us were sure if it was the fire alarm or the lockdown alarm. So we headed out into the hall to check, and there was no one out there, so we headed back in and climbed under our desk as per lockdown procedure. Cut to an hour or so later when a teacher burst in and nearly dies of relief. You see, the school was actually on fire, and we were the only students not accounted for, and half the faculty and fire department had been searching for us for ages. Literally, the whole school had filled with smoke while we kept super safe under our wooden desks. Jessica Edwards, New York. Well, Jessica, I'm very glad that you were safe and sound. Perhaps your school should think about making changes to the alarms to make sure everyone can tell the difference. Thank you for your amazing story. One last batch for this special These Are Your Stories. This time it comes from Ghost Stories with Sylvia, episode number 451. The topic was Into the Light, and it aired on August 27th, 2020.
These are your stories, sent by you, for you.
Our theme for the show this time is Into the Light. And without any hoopla whatsoever, here is our first story. Hello, Ron. I know my story is pretty short. I call it Into the Light, and I hope you like it. I live in a Texas town, and I know how you like to research the names. They say we do everything big in Texas. I've never agreed with that. I say we do everything weird. I live in Jot 'em Down, Texas. There have been people here since the late 1800s. A store was built in the 1930s called the Jot 'em Down Gin Corporation, after the fictional store in the radio show Lub and Abner. Later, the highway department used the name to identify the area, and it has stuck to this day. My story is this. I own and operate a small farm. We grow mostly corn and some soybeans. One night I was working late tilling a field for planting the next day when a very strange thing happened. I looked up into the night sky and a ribbon of light descended down. It hit the ground like a lightning bolt, but it made no sound. I pulled my tractor to a stop and watched in awe. This was the early 80s, and cell phones and digital cameras were not a thing. I have only my memory of the thing as proof. I walked up to it and stretched out my hand. It tingled a bit and then was gone. I've often wondered what would have happened if I had walked into the light. J. Jackson from Jot 'em Down, Texas. I have to wonder what would have happened as well. Would you even be writing us this story? It boggles the mind. Thank you for your story, Jackson. It truly is amazing. This next story comes from Michael Lambert. Mike lives in San Antonio, Texas, and shares his story with us via a Facebook post. He has titled his story, Zipline Angel. Hey Ron, I saw your tweet asking for stories about NDEs or Into the Light. Here's mine. This was around 2008. My family was spending the day at an apple orchard. There was a pretty amazing zip line there, and I guess I was talking crap to a kid in line behind me because the next thing I know I'm on the ground in complete darkness. The boy had apparently gotten angry and given me quite a shove. I flew off the platform and landed on the ground some 40 feet below. I heard some strange sounds, almost like violin strings being plucked, and then I felt like I was floating. I opened my eyes and I was looking down at my body on the ground below me. I could see all the trees in the orchard, the open field where I landed, and my mother running towards me, screaming. My brother got to me first. He was chuckling like an idiot, saying,
"Everything's gonna be just fine."
I watched as the story unfolded, as they placed me on a stretcher and carried me to an ambulance. I could see them grabbing a respirator and affixing it to my head. They worked on my body with all manner of things. I couldn't hear what they were saying. In fact, all I could really hear was that strange violin music. I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned to see a light. It was shaped sort of like a human, and it felt warm, comforting. I so badly wanted to go with it. And then, all of a sudden, I was thrown back into my body. I felt pain like nothing I had ever felt before. I opened my eyes and looked at the ambulance responders, holding the exact same things I saw from above. One of them smiled and said, "Welcome back, young man." I was taken to the hospital and ended up spending several weeks there recovering. I had a fractured skull and many broken bones. The crazy part of all of this was that I had a dream that night of riding that whole zip line. At the end was that strange humanoid light ready to catch me. Michael Lambert, San Antonio, Texas. What a great story. I think your light just may have been your guardian angel. These type of stories fascinate me because they need no proof. It happened and that's the end of it. The proof comes from the facts. Thank you for sharing your story with us, Mike. Well, there you have it. I think this just might give you an idea of the scope and just how many of your stories are really out there. I hope to do this again someday, but I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you have a story that you would like to share, head to the main website at ronsamazingstories.com, click on the story submission banner, leave your story, give it a title, and tell me where you're from. I'll read it if I can.
This is the Edsel. Its classic vertical grille, its elegant lines promise superb performance. And the Edsel keeps that promise on the road. These high compression, high torque engines are just one of many things that make driving an Edsel a great experience. To shift while both hands stay at the wheel. To feel the solid sureness of this beautifully engineered automobile. To sensibly test the potential of the newest engines in the world is something no man should miss. Your Edsel dealer invites you to take the Edsel for an introductory drive. This week, Road Test, the new member of the Ford family of fine cars, the Edsel, at your Edsel dealer.
They'll know you've arrived when you drive up in the 1958 Edsel, the car that's truly new from nameplate to tail lights. New from the front. New from the side. New from the rear. Only Edsel has the sleek, clean line design that sets it apart from the look-alike cars. And it combines new looks with the newest V8 engines in the world, the big new Edsel 400 and the power-packed Edsel 475. It is unlikely you have ever driven a car with so much real, usable power as the Edsel. And with Edsel's exclusive Teletouch drive, you drive more safely, more easily than you ever have before, because both hands can stay at the wheel while the Edsel shifts electrically. There's even the added luxury of new Edsel air suspension that's just like riding on air, because you are. And remember, of all the medium-priced cars, car for car, across the board, the 1958 Edsel is the one that's new and the lowest price, too. So see your Edsel dealer.
Well, that was episode number 507, and I don't have enough time here to thank everyone who submitted a story today, so let me just say this. Thank you to you all, and to all, a good night. If you want to follow the podcast or the blog, head to ronsamazingstories.com. There you will find any of the links I mentioned and how to contact us. Do you want to help the show? The best thing you can do is to tell your friends all about it, and please leave reviews or feedback wherever you listen. Clicking that follow or like button makes us grow. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come again to find out what are Ron's Amazing Stories.